Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video of Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge here on the internet. Today we are watching part 2 of the History of China by Suibhne. If you did not see part 1, there'll be a link down below, so you might want to check that out before you check out this one. So had a good time checking out the first part, which brought China up to when the Mongols invade and the Mongol occupation. So I think here we'll be seeing a little bit more closer to China in the modern age. So I'm looking forward to checking this out and appreciating what Suibhne has done here. Maybe be able to add a little bit as well. If you like the original video, there will be a down in the description be a link to it. Make sure that you head over there, give Suibhne a like and subscribe to make sure the credit goes. Credit goes over there. If you like what I'm doing here, I'd love to have you as a subscriber as well. I'm definitely enabled notifications if you'd like to join in and know when videos get premiered and live streams happen and things like that. And you can follow me along with my little journey of trying to find more historical knowledge out here on YouTube. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. History of China, Part 2.
This video is made possible by Skillshare. Join the millions of users already learning by heading to Skillshare at the link below to get your first 2 months of premium membership for free.
Cool. What do we got?
The Mongols under Ögedei Khan would grow rapidly into a large organized empire. The land flourished in Mongol law, and they financed their state through large-scale raids. The Chinese of the Jin and the Song dynasty were no match for the rapid horse-based warfare of the Mongols, whose entire strategy was based on lightning warfare. By 1271, Kublai Khan was crowned Great Khan and Emperor of all China.
The Mongols have been invading and trying to take China for decades. It pretty much took, from the first time the Mongols showed up to China, almost 100 years to take it. You know, the big challenge that the Mongols had in China was walled cities. Right, the Mongols are of course incredible at open field combat, but the fortifications of walled cities, big, thick, high walls, required the Mongols to innovate and get into siege warfare now, which of course they do. They adapt. You can see like the kind of trebuchet kind of technology with catapults, and they had to innovate. And that was one of the legacies of the Mongols, is they were very adaptable. They knew how to attack in a lot of different scenarios, and the sieges in China are a testament to that.
Beginning the Yuan dynasty.
Goodbye song. Now you got the Yuan dynasty. When you see the Yuan dynasty in the list of dynasties, that is the Mongol era. Yuan dynasty. Okay, so they took over the song. Time of the Yuan. Love that little intro. That's awesome.
The Mongols brought with them their law, customs, and steppe traditions, which blended with those of East Asia. Commerce and technology increased in the multi-ethnic empire, but it did not last very long. An inflation crisis due to the overissue of Mongol currency, as well as quite a few earthquakes, started to make the Chinese question whether heaven really wanted the Yuan Mongols to rule, and soon an all-out revolt ensued, with Huanzhang driving the Mongols back to Central Asia and crowning himself the first Ming emperor.
Okay, he's talking about the cultural, I guess, influence in China. The Mongols had a lot of restrictive policies when they eventually went into China. Basically, the Mongol policy is when they conquer you and they're in charge of you, they often scale the amount of oversight based on how hard you fought back. And the Chinese, they had the most difficult time with the Chinese than anybody else they had done. And when they came in, they tried to actually keep quite a divide between the Mongol culture and the Chinese culture, though, because they would, for example, they made it forbidden. They didn't want the Mongols to intermarry with the Chinese. They try to keep it exclusive for like their language and even like style, like clothing styles, hairstyle, like all kinds of different things there. They were quite restrictive of that. They did not want to blend that, and also they basically tried to annihilate at least any surviving member of the Song family, so there couldn't be a justification for an overthrow. And they also did not trust a lot of the Chinese governors as well. In fact, one of the things that the Mongols did quite a bit of was imported administrators from places like Persia into China. And so China was ruled by foreigners, whether they were Mongol or some other types that had been imported for 100 years. But yeah, they came in, and again, usually what you saw was they scaled. The harder you fought back, the harder the Mongols ruled.
The last two dynasties of China were the Ming and the Qing. Both presided over China's early modern period and shared similarities in policy.
You see, by the way, you see them throw up the wall? When the Ming take over and kick out the Mongols, they totally reinvested themselves into protection. And part of that was diverting resources and getting away from foreign explorations like they'd done with Zheng He in the very early Ming, and wanted to basically internally focus themselves. And one of the things they did was totally reinvested in the Great Wall. So they refortified it and extended it to basically what it looks like today. The wall you see today is really the Ming version. Before that, it was not nearly as fortified, more wood and mud and stuff, and dirt and stuff like that. But the Ming version that you see here extended the furthest it ever did and was the most fortified it ever did. The Mongols, again, left such a bad taste in the mouth of the Chinese that they wanted to not allow themselves to have much of the foreign influence ever again. They took it very seriously there.
1. Isolationism. Both dynasties pursued aggressive self-defense measures amid quite a lot of xenophobia. This manifested in the cutting of funding to the navy to fund other projects such as the Great Wall. 2. Both had terrible mismanagement of money. Being unwilling to trade with foreign powers beyond the port of Canton led to an increased self-reliance.
Well, I mean, that's, again, the Mongols left such a bad taste in the Chinese mouth. They are fearful of foreign influence forever. And now in this new era, especially about the 15 to 1600s, when Europeans are starting to show up to look for trade opportunities, the Chinese are very, very reluctant to do that. They only open up basically Canton for a while there, and were very restrictive about what they would trade, and they didn't want the foreigners to stick around. They were very, very reluctant to do that. So it's a total internal thing, but you can see, why is this internalization happening? Go back to the Mongols. They hated, the Chinese hated every minute of that nearly 100-year occupation by the Mongols.
And decreased sphere of influence. 3. Both failed to recognize the threat of foreign powers in their waters, all of whom would play a direct role in collapsing the dynastical system by the turn of the century. China's unwillingness to modernize and trade with the West would lead indirectly to the Opium Wars and the Taiping Rebellion by parties like the British, French, and Japanese, who had a vested interest in opening up China to trade and Christianity.
Remember, the Chinese didn't want any goods. I mean, to be honest, there's nothing that the Europeans make that the Chinese need. Or, to be honest, anything that the Europeans make that the Chinese don't already make better. So that's when the British, who were just persistent in this, found the little cracks in trade opportunities, especially with drugs, right? For the opium and stuff they were getting out of their possessions in South Asia, they start illegally dealing with that and getting China hooked in a way, till the point it becomes a massive kind of epidemic of drug culture in China that the British were highly responsible for. And I'm sure they're going to get to what's called the Opium Wars, which is a response to that.
This in turn would spark the Boxer Rebellion as a counter-revolt against foreign influence in China. The Qing had dealt with none of these problems well enough, and soon revolts were more common than peace. Critiques view the failure of the Qing as the century of humiliation. In 1912, the Qin collapsed, and China fractured into numerous pieces of independent states called
Wars,
cliques, also known as the Warlord era. China would need to unify.
China broke again, right? Unites and then breaks again. Qing Dynasty was unable to eventually fend itself off from larger powers. You saw the Boxer Rebellion was basically a response by the Chinese people that they feel like their country's being totally sold out and they want to kick out foreign influence. Problem is the Chinese are going to be fighting a coalition of, 5 or so nations, modern militarized nations that the Chinese, who did not industrialize, like these nations did, like Japan, for example, right, was part of this as well, and the European nations. And without that modernization and industrialization, I should mean, they were no had no chance, and they get squashed in the Boxer Rebellion. And as a result of that, they lose even more control, and there's even more foreign influence. And with the Qing unable to fend that off, as you saw, they collapse. Right, and that's a big moment. The end of the Qing dynasty. That's the final Chinese dynasty. You have a dynastic cycle going back millennia, and ended here in 1912. I mean, that's quite a moment for Chinese history. The oldest surviving civilization on Earth right now.
And to do that, a republican movement under Sun Yat-sen allied with the communists under the CCP to fight the warlords on a united front. This went about as well as you would expect, with Kuomintang leader Chiang Kai-shek purging and executing communists en masse, breaking the fragile alliance. Soon, it was civil war, and the CCP were on the brink of annihilation. Were it not for a near miraculous retreat of thousands of kilometers under Mao Zedong, called the Long March. This incredible journey helped recruit new members, but the war had to be put on hold in 1932, when the...
Okay. Yeah, so you have this kind of between the world wars, I guess you would say, the Chinese Civil War, right? You have the nationalist Kuomintang versus the communists, so Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, and the nationalists, or the Kuomintang, were winning. They were winning the war. I mean, they basically drove the communists, like you saw there, drove them out of the major populated areas of eastern China.
And he helped recruit new members.
Get back to that. And basically, they did flee for their lives in the long march, which has become a huge badge of honor to communist history in China, as these people they felt persecuted and basically pushed out of their lands and trying to find a safe place, which they do up more in central China, up there, away from everything, and ended up getting a lot of support. When they would go through these more peasant lands, people kind of bought into their cause as they would come through their villages. They looked like these people that were so devout to their cause, and it converted a lot of people along the trek, which was thousands of miles. I mean, when you add up, if you were to go on the entire long march, that march is longer than like the United States is. I mean, wide, and a lot of people died. It also made Mao basically a hero in the eyes of the communists, as he kind of tried to lead through this very difficult moment. But as you're going to see here, World War II is about to break out, and you're going to see that is going to affect the current civil war. And you'll see, if you don't know, Suibhne will probably explain here.
But the war had to be put on hold in 1932, when the Imperial Japanese Army invaded the Manchurian cliques, and were now at the doorstep of China proper. With the threat of the Japanese, the two sides formed a united second front. The Japanese army invaded China in 1937.
I mean, they kind of had to unite. They couldn't take them on their own. They needed the help. I think it's one of those things where it's like, hey, we don't like each other, but we can at least agree that we dislike the Japanese more, right? So unify there. And one thing I'm hoping we kind of lead to here is, who benefited most from taking this sort of break of the Civil War? Which side is going to end up benefiting more?
After a fabricated Chinese skirmish at the Marco Polo Bridge in Beijing. The war was tragic for the Chinese, with the second highest casualties of the entire Second World War. Millions of civilians and soldiers lost their lives for a state that did not technically exist. The ill-prepared and badly led Chinese armies were no match for the strict discipline of the Japanese Imperial Army, with many blunders during the invasion. At one point, the Republican Army even accidentally drowning 500,000 people while flooding the Yellow River in an attempt to halt the Japanese advance. After a 3-month-long siege at Shanghai, the devastated Republican Army retreated to the capital at Nanking, which fell to the Japanese on the 13th of December.
An event you probably haven't heard about in the West, known as the Rape of Nanking. The Japanese were so senselessly brutal to the Chinese that the Nazi ambassador was the voice of reason and is now celebrated as a hero in China. His letters and journals from the time tell of how up to 300,000 people were raped and murdered during the occupation. There were even contests to see which officers could behead 100 people with their swords in the fastest time, the results of which were printed in Japanese newspapers with the same tone that you would expect to see when reporting on a baseball game. Why has this event been mostly forgotten to history and in some cases flat out denied? When you're done here, head on over to my channel to find out.
glad they touched on that. The Rape of Nanking is one of the most overlooked atrocities in not covered, I guess, by Westerners. Only because the West has focused more on the Nazi Holocaust, or the Holocaust by the Nazis, than what happened there, and not enough time to maybe go into that now, but definitely look into it, as it is a very very difficult thing to learn about the atrocities that ended up going down there. He just touched on it in a somewhat safe for work kind of manner, right? But if you want to know real history, and you're willing to know the gory details and that sort of things, then definitely look into it. You'll get a totally new perspective on the eastern part of World War II, knowing what happened at Nanking. But anyway.
Please be sure to check out Knowing Better's channel in the link below for more on how entrenched the events at Nanking became on the collective Chinese psyche.
It's great.
Japan's war was stunningly successful. However, they began losing a lot of ground by 1945, since they were now fighting a four-front war.
Overextended.
The stunning successes of the Communist Army and the failures of the Republican Army against the Japanese meant that the CCP was on much better footing in the minds of the people. The massive conflict had been an opportunity for Mao to prove his devotion to China, and millions flocked to his side.
What I was waiting for is to see, when I asked you earlier about which side of in the Chinese Civil War benefits most from what's happening in World War II, and it's definitely the communists. They did very well in fighting, and then through these years, just more and more people got into their cause, and then by the end of the war, it's like a totally new communist party with way more individuals. Also, now experienced fighters, they're going to be able to take that fight to the military leadership that was the Kuomintang that they were fighting before. Now they're experienced. They have a lot more motivation for their cause. A lot of new recruits. The World War II is one of the best things that happened to just the potential future of communism there.
China's civil war resumed not long after, and with the help of the Soviet army in northern China, the tide turned in the CCP's favor.
Isn't that amazing that what China just went through? Civil war, straight to World War II, straight to a civil war. There was no break, right? Their war is going on for like 20 years, right? Where World War II is smaller, much smaller, a few years. To them, the World War II was only the center point of a much larger conflict there. Talk about devastating couple decades for China.
The Kuomintang's Republican Army were forced to retreat to the island of Taiwan, which still calls itself the Republic of China to this day.
And often not observed by the Chinese as an independent state today. That's been a huge thing that has caused issues for Taiwan's legitimacy in a way, even though most nations kind of observe that. But that's something that still today is China will not observe that independence. The main China, right?
China was declared the People's Republic in 1949, with Mao named Supreme Chairman. He is infamous for the so-called necessary evils by which he ruled the mainland, both in terms of the starvation of millions of his own people during the Great Leap Forward, where industrialization caused a massive famine, and also the Cultural Revolution to dispose of old traditions and systems, resulting in the execution of thousands of dissidents. A controversial figure in both the West and the East, seen as both tyrant and liberator.
I'd love to talk more about the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which really, especially with the Great Leap Forward, was ended up being a massive backfire. Don't have really maybe enough time to talk on that right now, but if you're interested in the history, that's probably the hardest times that the Chinese went through under the communist era was the Great Leap Forward, which is basically basically what it was is a superhuman effort to try to mass produce things in China, and it ends up basically backfiring and creating one of the worst famines in human history. Millions perish from it as well. And the Cultural Revolution was, I kind of look at that as like a pep rally for generation 2 of the communists, where, you know, you have this new generation that's been born that didn't get to see like the glory days, I guess you would call, of like the passion of Chinese communism in the early days, like their parents would have, and try to basically get the youth to buy into the communist spirit. And then what that ended up doing was purging anybody that might be a dissident to that. Okay, educators and a lot of intellectuals and stuff like that were part of those persecuted as a result.
China seemed like an ally of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, especially during their involvement in the Korean and Vietnam Wars against the West. But in reality, Sino-Soviet relations grew ever more antagonistic.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like at first there could be an alliance with like Stalin and Mao, and that would have been, and that was what like the West, like in the United States, was just scared to death of, was an alliance of China, the most populous nation on the planet, and Russia, who's the greatest enemy of the West at this time because of their communist stance. But I guess fortunately for the West, the relationship between China and Russia broke down as it didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. So threat avoided for the West at what that could have turned into.
Reflecting their isolationist past, much changed after Mao's death, and the government began to relinquish controls over the planned economy. However, the same year the Berlin Wall fell, when calls for democracy sparked protests in the Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government revealed to the world that they had not weakened and were not going to collapse like other socialist states by firing on their own people. A more mixed economy.
Tiananmen Square massacre was in response to pro-democracy protests there in the 80s. Late 80s there, and the military basically ended up being unleashed on the protesters, which are probably 100,000 at least there, and thousands got pretty much slaughtered there, which is also has been attempted to cover up a lot too. So you see these protests and stuff happening in kind of opposition to the policies that the Chinese were into, even clear in the 1980s, when there definitely was progression in some things. Once Mao died, you saw a lot more easing up a little bit of some of the restrictions. You saw a little bit more free market, a little bit of that going on, while still trying to keep the elements and the kind of the spirit of communism there, and trying to kind of teeter on that line. You know, maybe not unsimilar to what the Russians were doing in the final years with Glasnost and Perestroika, and trying to lighten up a few things. You see a little bit with China, but you can see there's still a big group in China there as a result with Tiananmen Square that wants to see much, much bigger changes.
Of socialism and capitalism triumphed, and soon China's economy began to grow and industrialize at a rapid rate, becoming the first nation to surpass a population of 1 billion. Modern China experienced an even further modernization, becoming the world's manufacturing powerhouse for both low and high-quality products. However, even though economically China became more open, culturally they remained well and truly closed, with modern China being one of the most culturally isolated nations in the world.
That is the biggest continuity of Chinese history, ever since the birth of China, thousands of years ago, and their geographic development outside and very far from the other major civilizations of the world. I'm talking ancient Indus Valley and Mesopotamia and Egypt. Being so geographically isolated was the original influence about why China will always develop this unique culture and take pride in it, and always have for millennia. You could see how far that goes back, and it's happening still today, and it's still a big source of pride.
So much so that this video is illegal there.
No YouTube.
Chinese internet censorship is one of the strictest in the world, with the central government restricting access to YouTube and other Google services, as well as social media sites like Facebook and Twitter. But lucky for us, Skillshare is still available there. Want to learn how to do beautiful Chinese calligraphy? Maybe you'd like to master some conversational Mandarin, or perhaps you just want to learn how to make authentic chow mein. You can do all this from the comfort of your own home with Skillshare. With over 20,000 online courses, you can learn just about anything from design to science and technology, or even a new business skill. It's time for you to stop procrastinating and start learning something new today with your premium account. And just for Suibhne viewers, you can get 2 months premium subscription for free when you head to the link below. Head to Skillshare today to start learning, and rest assured you can continue learning when you visit China.
I need to get to China. I need to visit.
Thank you everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe, and if you're looking to help the channel in another way, you can head over to my Patreon page in the link below. Until next time.
Okay, awesome job by Suibhne. Love his stuff. Great stuff. Hopefully I was able to add just a few things. Again, you know, it's hard to put... I mean, they started from the 1200s, well, about 1300s to the modern day. You got 700 years of history you have to cover. You're covering in 9 minutes. Of course, there's not as much detail with a lot of things. So there's a lot of things, hopefully, that will, if you didn't learn about some of the events and things that are going on there, that you can kind of branch into to get into your own research. Rape of Nanking, Boxer Rebellion. Wasn't able to really hit on the Opium Wars, which is kind of the Chinese response to trying to stop the opium and all that, the opium trade, which was so entrenched there. So there's a lot of things to definitely keep going. That's why, you know, I really like studying China, because I'm always learning more and more things about it as I get older, and it just becomes more and more interesting to me and more impressive to see how many things they've gone through in the history of this nation, in this civilization. So, well, that was awesome. Please support Suibhne there. He's got his Patreon channel. If you can only afford, you know, one Patreon channel between mine and his, go to his. But if you'd like to support my channel, and you can do that through Patreon as well, there'll be a link down below. One of the perks of being a Patreon member of any kind of pledge level is you get to participate in weekly polls for videos that get highlighted and featured onto my channel here. It's a way to get a little more influence on what I end up watching and be able to comment on here. And this video, if you watch part 1, Animated History of China was voted on by patron pledgers. So thanks to them for doing this, and I really definitely enjoyed it. So again, hope to see you there. You know, if you join Patreon, that's fantastic. If you have not subbed, love to have you a subscriber so you can kind of join our community. Also, if you'd like to get a little touch of our community and just be a part of a great history community in general, definitely invite you to join our Discord server, which a link will be down below if you have not already. We have a large group of just history-minded people that love to talk about all kinds of topics, and love to have you there and be a part of our community just like that. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and call it here. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned. I know I did, and let's keep learning together. Let's never stop, all right? Okay, see ya.